The Tower of London is one of the most famous and infamous places in the history of Great Britain. It became a symbol of terror and oppression, and the stories about it tell of countless murders, horrific torture, and even ghosts. My name is Special Agent Anderson. These are the secrets of the Tower of London. The Tower of London was built in 1066 by William the Conqueror to consolidate his power over the newly conquered British Isles. The impressive construction not only impressed enemies, but also allies, who were supposed to recognize the power of the ruler simply by the majesty of this complex. However, it was not only its impressive walls that gave the tower its significance, but above all the horrors that took place behind these walls. The Tower of London was a feared prison. Political prisoners, traitors, and even kings and queens were imprisoned here. One notorious prisoner was Guy Fawkes, the leader of the famous gunpowder plot. This plot aimed to blow up the English Parliament on November 5, 1605, in order to kill King James I and end Protestant rule. Fawkes and his co-conspirators, a group of Catholic rebels, wanted to end the oppression of Catholics in England and bring a Catholic monarch to the throne with this assassination attempt. Guy Fawkes was the one guarding the gunpowder barrels in the basement of the Houses of Parliament when he was discovered and arrested. After his arrest, he was cruelly tortured in the tower to betray his co-conspirators. The torture he was subjected to was so intense that his signature on the confession is barely legible. However, Guy Fawkes' legacy extends far beyond the gunpowder plot. Every year, Guy Fawkes Day is celebrated on November 5th, when bonfires are lit and fireworks are set off to commemorate the thwarting of the plot. His mask, known from the movie V for Vendetta, is now a symbol of resistance and is used by the hacker group Anonymous. The instruments of torture used in the tower, including the terrifying rack, still send shivers down the spine of visitors today. The rack, also known as the rack, was one of the most notorious instruments of torture. Prisoners were strapped to this device while their limbs were slowly and painfully pulled apart by turning levers, which could often lead to permanent mutilation or even death. Another cruel method was the Scavenger's daughter, a metal frame that forced the prisoner's body into an inhumanly tight position, causing pain and respiratory distress. This instrument was specially designed to torture victims without leaving visible injuries, making it particularly insidious. Thumb screws, with which the joints of the fingers were crushed, and iron neck collars, which restricted freedom of movement and could lead to breathing difficulties, were also among the tools used to force confessions. Particularly cruel was the use of pressing, in which heavy stones were placed on the victim's body until they either confessed or died. This was complemented by the cage of despair, a tiny metal cage in which victims were left for days, often without food or water. Each of these methods testified to the cruelty with which the tower was used to spread fear. But the history of the tower is also a history of executions. Many prominent figures met a violent end here, including Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, who was accused of adultery and treason and beheaded. Her final resting place is said to be in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, which is located inside the tower. Visitors repeatedly report sightings of a ghostly shadow wandering through the corridors of the tower, allegedly Anne Boleyn herself, who cannot find peace. Another prominent name is Lady Jane Grey, the 9 Days Queen, who was also imprisoned in the tower and eventually beheaded on the scaffold. Her tragic story and young age make her one of the most pitiful figures in English history. One of the tower's most gruesome stories is that of the princes in the tower. Edward IV's 2 young sons, Edward and Richard, were imprisoned in the tower after their father's death in 1483. Their uncle Richard III claimed the throne for himself and declared the boys bastards. Shortly afterwards, the princes disappeared without trace, and to this day, there is no clear evidence of what happened to them. In 1674, during renovation work, 2 small skeletons were discovered that could possibly belong to the princes. But the true story remains an unsolved mystery. Historians are still debating who was responsible and the exact circumstances, with Richard III often named as the prime suspect. Animals also played a role in the tower's history. In the Middle Ages, the tower housed a menagerie of exotic animals, including lions, monkeys, and even a polar bear, These animals were kept as a sign of the crown's power and were often mistreated. The polar bear, a gift from the Norwegian king, was allegedly allowed to go fishing in the waters of the Thames, which amazed Londoners. The menagerie served not only to entertain the court, but also as a demonstration of the king's wealth and power. However, the presence of these wild creatures gave the tower a bizarre, almost grotesque atmosphere, which is still part of its fascination today. The tower's guardians, the yeoman warders, better known as beefeaters, are still an integral part of this historic site today. The name beefeaters dates back to the time when the warders had the right to consume meat from the royal stores in the royal kitchen, a privilege that was particularly valuable in times of food shortages. Their traditional uniforms and duties, including guarding the British crown jewels, make them living symbols of tradition. But they also tell of eerie experiences and encounters with ghosts said to haunt the tower. Stories of disembodied voices, sudden cold, and unexplained apparitions are not uncommon among the guardians. One of the most famous ghost stories concerns the ghost of Thomas Becket, who was allegedly seen in the tower in the Middle Ages. Thomas Becket was once Archbishop of Canterbury and a close confidant of King Henry II, but their relationship broke down when Becket began to defend the power of the church over the crown. This led to a bitter conflict that ended in a tragic climax. On December 29, 1170, Becket was brutally murdered by Knights of the King in Canterbury Cathedral. His death shocked Christendom, and Becket was canonized soon afterwards. According to legend, his ghost was seen in the Tower of London, possibly as a symbol of the conflict between the church and the crown. Some believe that Becket haunts the tower as a warning of the consequences of abuse of power and betrayal. The Tower of London is not only a place of history, but also a place of legends and myths. Many stories surround the ravens that live in the tower. Legend has it that the British monarchy will fall if the ravens ever leave the tower. That is why at least 6 ravens are kept on the grounds at all times. This legend contributes to the mystical aura of the tower, which embodies the connection between history and superstition like no other place. Today, the Tower of London is one of the most visited tourist attractions in the world and a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Millions of people come here every year to marvel at the crown jewels, visit the torture chambers, and hear the stories of those who lived, suffered, and died here. But despite its current status as a museum, the tower remains a place that exerts a dark fascination and reminds visitors how close the glories and horrors of history can be. Every stone, every corner, every shadow of the tower seems to whisper of a story that both fascinates and terrifies us.